Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Week, the Political Roundtable from the Commonwealth Club of California, coming to you from the Tony Rembe Rock Auditorium on Monday, May 7th, 2018. So we learned this week that former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen reportedly owes $280,000 to back taxes. As Conan O'Brien quipped, isn't that incredible? Apparently there's a porn star named Back Taxes. So, we'll move on to more erudite discussions, but I'm John Zipper, your host for Week to Week, and the Commonwealth Club's Vice President of Media and Editorial. On today's program, we're going to discuss some state election news, the economic good times, the latest from the president's world, Starbucks and racial profiling, and of course, we'll end the evening with our news quiz. The Commonwealth Club welcomes people with a wide range of views, and any opinions that are expressed up here are those solely of the speakers and not of the Commonwealth Club. So let's meet our panelists for today. I think you know them all. They've been here a number of times. I'll start on the far end with Chuck Nevius, C.W. Nevius as he's known.
Thank you.
He's a columnist for the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and we all remember him as a columnist for a long time for the San Francisco Chronicle. He's on Twitter, at C.W. Nevius. Next to him is Barbara Marshman. She's a former editorial page editor from the Mercury News. She's on Twitter at Barb Marshman. So welcome back, Barb. And next to me is Carson Bruno. He's the Assistant Dean for Admission and Program Relations at Pepperdine University's School of Public Policy. He's also a former Hoover Institute Research Fellow, and he's on Twitter at Carson J.F. Bruno. So welcome back, Carson. Thank you. You all know how we do it. There are question cards spread throughout the room. We'll have those collected, and I will ask as many as I can during our hour here together. So we're going to start with state politics. Voters begin filling out their vote-by-mail ballots, actually this week. And so that actually means that the ability for the candidates to steal votes from other candidates is starting to decrease pretty rapidly, right? Because a majority of Californians will vote either by mail or in person ahead of the election day. So let's look at some elections, starting with the race to succeed Governor Jerry Brown. Now, last week at the Commonwealth Club, how many of you were here for Willie Brown, the former San Francisco mayor? Willie Brown was here. Did anyone see him?
Few over here.
Yep. So he said that the candidate to watch in the gubernatorial race isn't John Cox, the Republican who has been getting in second place in some polls. It's actually fellow Republican Travis Allen. And Brown even said that Allen could possibly win the election against Gavin Newsom in November. So that's Willie Brown's insight. I wanted to start with you, Carson. I mean, are the Republican candidates surging right now in the polls? They seem to be doing better than they have.
So I actually wrote down some numbers because I'm known for my numbers. So I won't actually have numbers for you on this one, John, because I mean the conventional wisdom, especially in the news of the last 2 to maybe 3 weeks, has been this kind of surging of John Cox, the Republican businessman who has been running for quite some time, putting a lot of his own money, millions of his own dollars into his campaign. So Republicans like him because he can actually self-fund. They don't have to really worry about that. Because the Republicans don't have the money to really run statewide at this point, especially when you see most of the business types going really full on behind Antonio Villaraigosa, the former mayor of Los Angeles, and so John Cox has been surging in a lot of polling, but when you actually look at the numbers, you actually don't really see too much movement happening at all. So if you take all polling, that's both public polling, but also some of the private polls that have been released to the public, if you take all of those since last October, I think it was, Gavin Newsom's at the top with 24%, Villaraigosa at 16%. Then you have, I'm looking at the wrong numbers here. Newsom at 26%, Villaraigosa 14%, John Cox at 12%, and then Travis Allen at 10%. Fast forward to just those that have happened since April, so we're looking at just two or three of the most recent polls. You're at Gavin Newsom at 26%, Villaraigosa at 14%, John Cox at 17%, Travis Allen at 13%. So really, the margin of error when it comes to that second place finisher between Villaraigosa, John Cox, or Travis Allen is basically non-existent. what does that mean really right now for Republicans? It means that they need to coalesce around one person. And the convention that just happened in San Diego was really their chance to try to do that, and they didn't.
They did, right.
So it's really a toss-up. What will happen? Will Villaraigosa be able to kind of coalesce the remaining Democrats and some disenfranchised Republicans, independents, to really kind of get that second spot, which would make the general election quite competitive? Or will one of the Republicans make it into the top two, making sure that Gavin Newsom wins the November election?
Well, Gavin Newsom is showing some weakness, though. I mean,
Yes.
there are a lot of undecideds, am I correct?
Right. If you think about it, 75% of voters want someone other than Gavin Newsom at
Right.
this point.
Yeah. I mean, Barbara, if
The
it's
applause in this San Francisco crowd amazes me.
so Barbara, if it is Newsom against, say, a Republican, who do you think would do well in November?
Well, I think Villaraigosa would do better than Newsom. I mean, Newsom is totally union. He's gone. He started out, 5 years ago. He was always down at Silicon Valley Leadership Group doing forums and things, and I would sit there as the moderator and ask him questions, and he would not answer them, but talk for twice the limited time. But don't get me started. But he was kind of the darling of business at that time. And then somewhere in his first year as lieutenant governor, he kind of gave that up. I think he tried to do a business roundtable, didn't really work out. And now he's the unions guy. And Villaraigosa is not a right winger for sure, but I think he has a little more of a balance in his reputation. Am I right, Carson?
It's really interesting because Villaraigosa started off in the unions.
Yeah.
I mean, he was he was the teacher unions guy.
Yeah.
When he was in the assembly and then speaker. It was really only when he became Los Angeles mayor where he started to really kind of peeve them because he had to do some things that really weren't kind of touting the CTA line.
Right.
And then you say that exactly. I mean, Newsom was the business guy, and they've kind of flip-flopped on who they are at this point. I think a lot of it's been political posturing on their parts. But then also, I think it's just you look at the landscape, and that's really kind of where we are with the Republican Party kind of falling apart completely in the state. The business types need to look for someone who can champion and rally for them. And Villaraigosa has already proven that he's willing to do so when he was mayor of Los Angeles. So they have some sort of hope that he will continue to do so if he were back in Sacramento.
And it's been interesting. The original premise was that if Newsom is the nominee from the Democratic Party, if he runs against a Republican, it's a clear path. It's a clear path to the governorship. But inevitably, Newsom runs into the idea that he's too slick, that he's too good looking, that he's too entitled. I saw a column the other day that he's a child of privilege. He's this great looking guy. So apparently he should give away his money and shave his head, and then he would be appealing.
Do a comb over.
Do a comb over. I think it's his race to lose. He's an attractive candidate. He's got a million ideas, as Barbara tried to restrain his ideas. He has been lieutenant governor. He's been priming for this his entire life. I just had a conversation today. I went to lunch with a guy who's a political, kind of an operative, and we were saying, Newsom has always insisted that he is a governor. He's a governor. Whereas actually a lot of people thought as a senator, he could be a legislator. That's the kind of thing. He's constantly coming up with new and fresh ideas. But he has the sense that he wants to be a governor. I was a mayor. I'm going to be a governor. And who knows where I go from here, but White House, White House, White House. We're just not going to say it. So it'll be interesting to see how it falls out. But there is a resentment to him as being just a little too slick.
But was he collaborative as a mayor? Did he? I mean, the things he's known for, like gay marriage, he just kind of did on his own. Was he a mayor who worked with the legislature?
Well, it's San Francisco, so no one's collaborative.
Right. Sorry.
We don't do collab.
I forgot, yeah.
No, I think he was deft enough to get the votes he needed to do the things he needed to do. And I still think, and there have been bumps in the road, but I still think that care not cash, the idea of taking the money that homeless and unemployed people are able to get from the city, turn that into a rental property in a single room occupancy home and housing as many people as he did, that was a new idea. And we're still wrestling with it in San Francisco. We're still wrestling with it across the country. Homelessness is a huge problem. But that was an innovative idea that he was able to put together. So he can do it. He can also do an 8-hour State of the City message, which put everybody to sleep. So he needs to be restrained.
Okay. Meanwhile, in the U.S. Senate race, in which Dianne Feinstein is defending her seat, a recent poll has second place occupied by a neo-Nazi by the name of Patrick Little. Candidate Little wants to limit Jewish representation in government, accuses Dianne Feinstein of engaging the U.S. in, quote, Zionist wars, and among other outrageous claims. Now, it needs to be said, this neo-Nazi candidate who's running as a Republican showed up at this GOP convention in the state. They did not let him in. They've been very clear about, decrying both him and his views. But I want to get your opinions on it, though. I do want to say it reminds me of, and again, we're in California, so you might not remember this. In 1986 in Illinois, there were state elections. And Adlai Stevenson III was running for governor. He had a shot. Not a good one because there was a popular Republican governor, but he had a shot. And two fringe right-wing candidates managed to get on the ballot as Democratic nominees both for lieutenant governor and the Secretary of State. So Adlai Stevenson left the Democratic ticket because he would not run with them. He ran as a third-party candidate, and incumbent Republican Governor James Thompson easily won a fourth term by a landslide. Don't worry, Illinois Republicans bounced back. They eventually elected Rod Blagojevich, so you can turn things around. But I mean, does this just point to the weakness of the Republican Party that someone like that could even run for it, or is this just it could happen to any party because he's not going to get the nomination?
Well, first off, that poll is a completely botched poll.
Okay.
So that has to be understood. There are 11 Republicans running for the U.S. Senate. That poll included 2 of them. That individual, which I actually don't even know his name, but it's a very average-sounding name. The other one was a Hispanic-sounding name. So there were the only 2 Republicans actually polled in that survey. So what's going to happen? The Republicans who have no clue who any of the candidates are who are actually running, because none of them actually have the money to actually, I think, even file with the FPPC or FEC. So they have no clue. All they have is a name and a R next to their name. And given the state of the Republican Party, they chose the one that sounded like the white guy.
Well, and let's be bipartisan here. That was actually the excuse or the explanation that was given in Illinois. These were 2 people with very, very common, generic-sounding, if you will, white names. And I don't recall who was running against them, but they were less generic-sounding. So they were kind of figuring when you don't know who's on the ballot, and people just kind of went with. Okay.
Yeah. And still, he only polled like 10% or something, 11%.
Yeah.
So the headlines of The Hill and all these newspapers made it sound like he was surging right behind Dianne Feinstein, and he was really only barely breaking single digits. Meanwhile, they only gave Republicans 2 options on that survey. So what that speaks, though, is the broader problem is that there are 11 Republicans running, none that I could name, none that Jim Brolte probably can't even name them, to be honest, the chairman of the Republican Party here in California. There's just no one willing to run. Therefore, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be Dianne Feinstein versus Kevin De Leon at this point, because there's no way for ballots hitting doorsteps starting today that anyone's going to have the resources to really kind of coalesce and get the amount of support needed. Think back to 2014 when it was Duff. It was 2014.
Yes.
No, sorry, 2016.
16.
Yeah. When you had Duff, you had Tom Del Beccaro, you had Rocky Chavez for a little while running. It's fairly decent candidates, at least people with some stature. And the Republicans were still blocked from the ballot in that election. So it's I think a foregone conclusion, at least on that ticket, that it'll be a Democrat versus Democrat, in my opinion.
Well, I think again, Dianne Feinstein's race to lose. I don't think she will, but it also speaks to the calcification of politics and the idea that I think everyone would like to see at this time in history. We'd love to see new ideas, new faces, and she's been terrific. She's been a great San Franciscan. We all love her, but she's 84 years old, and I think that if only we could find a way to reinvigorate the pool of candidates, I think that would be such a great moment in our political history right now. It's not happening, and yet no one seems to be able to come up and I can tell you that I spoke to someone in her inner circle months ago, and she wasn't really sure if she was going to run, but he basically said she's going to raise the money and see what happens, and if there's a real strong push, if there's someone who comes up against her, maybe she'll think about it. No one did, and they've kind of rolled it back over her way. And again, calcification in the democratic process, and I think that's not a great thing.
And I think it's a shame, Kevin, not pro or con Kevin, although I wouldn't have thought, I wouldn't have thought of Senate for Kevin. Kevin DeLeon. But if Diane had decided not to run, you would have had a larger field of people with some stature.
You would hope so.
Even perhaps, Duff probably would have run. Duff Sonda probably would have run. The Republicans with some standing might have gotten out there in an open race, but this way it's.
I mean, you would hope so, but look on the Democratic side with Barbara Boxer retiring. They cleared the field for Harris. I mean, an open Senate seat that those only come around in one generation, really, especially in a state like California where you're not really kind of looking at too much competition between the parties. Why did all of those very young statewide Democrats not clamor at that?
Right.
Even if they couldn't have won it, they could have made their name statewide.
Easily pivot into something else.
And what are the Republicans saying right now? They're running against Nancy Pelosi, which is another example of someone who's been there for years. And are we going to just going to put up with it? And yet, again, there has been no alternative. There's been no good alternative to it.
Okay, I want to talk about an issue that is a pretty hot topic across the state and certainly here in the Bay Area this election season, and it's a bill that's being kicked around in the state government. Scott Wiener, our state senator from San Francisco, it's called SB 1045, and it involves expanding conservatorship over people who are severely mentally ill, chronically homeless. As you can imagine, very controversial because people, some are worried that this will be very broadly applied. I want to start with you, Chuck, because you've written about and you've met a lot of folks in homeless and that all the connected communities there. Do you think this bill, should it pass, do you think it would actually do anything to address some of the severe homeless issues and particularly the folks who are the most severely mentally ill?
Severely mentally ill. My wife came home the other day and she'd walked past Whole Foods and she said there was a guy in front of Whole Foods on the sidewalk, face down, and he had his pants around his ankles, and he was incoherent. And she said, how in the world can we leave these people on the street? And that's the push for conservatorship. And it is controversial because you are going to a judge and you are asking for permission to take this person and say, you need to take your medications. And if you're not going to take your medications, we're going to administer your medications. And that goes back to the old days when we had the snake pit, terrible places state hospitals where we put people, and it was a mess. We got away from that, but little by little, and I said earlier in the green room, the thing that convinced me were the parents of these people who would say to me and to everybody else, I have been here. I am begging you to find a place for my son. He cannot take care of himself. He is a danger to himself. He's a danger to others. He has episodes. He's a danger to us. We need to have him in a place where we know he's safe. The standard is very high. You don't just grab someone and put them in there, but a judge can put them in a conservatorship program where they are required to take their meds. And just real quickly, but I said the other day that one of the people before Barbara Garcia had the job, the director of health in San Francisco used to say that severe mental illness is the only disease that makes you not want to take the drugs that make you better. Because you're convinced. You miss a couple days and you say, I am feeling great. I have got so much energy. And you're the last person to know that you've slipped over the side. And you have those things. So it is controversial, But I have, after years of talking about this, come around to say I think it's a worthwhile and a logical way to approach this problem. And if you got 100 people on the streets of San Francisco who were severely disturbed off those streets into good quality care, it would make a big difference in the quality of life in San Francisco or in Los Angeles or in, I mean, it's a national problem. It's not a San Francisco problem. But anyway, this concludes commercial announcement. I'm sorry.
Well, Barb, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think again, we did talk about this in the green room, and I mentioned that when I was a cub reporter at a small town paper, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, there was an institution near us called Pennhurst State Hospital. I heard some, and I was involved in several exposés of Pennhurst, the horrible things that went on there, awful pictures, the way. And I remember at that time people there saying to me, but what we do the best we can with the resources we have. What happens if these people aren't here? And eventually, I saw a few notes of recognition in the room. The Supreme Court case that led to the institutionalization was Pennhurst versus the federal government, and the order came down. These places violated civil rights, and they're gone now. But that was a big part of the start of all this.
Carson, we recently had in a different program at the club one of the San Francisco supervisors here, and he was asked, when you're talking about homelessness in the city, what do you focus on? Do you focus on the mental health issues, or do you focus on the actual housing stock issues? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it needs to be either or situation. And if you were making it like that, you're already losing the conversation. You're losing the debate. The problem's going to continue getting worse. Especially in major cities like San Francisco, like Los Angeles, it is a multifaceted situation. You're going to have a population that have chosen to be homeless. That is a life choice of theirs. You're never going to eradicate that. That's a particular popular thing in California, in places like LA and San Francisco. So that one you kind of set aside because that's a life choice that people who can make their own decisions are actually making that decision. But then you do have to look at the housing situation alongside the mental health situation. And the mental health situation is both a mental health but also a drug situation too. The two go hand in hand. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they're also not necessarily always tied together. But there's a lot of different things there. And I don't know if cities themselves, counties themselves, have the resources and the wherewithal to be able to do this. This is really becoming a statewide problem, not just a San Francisco problem, not just a Los Angeles problem, not just a Palo Alto problem. This is an entire coastal California, statewide California problem. And so it's increasingly becoming more and more necessary to have statewide solutions, which requires statewide legislation. And there's this big hoopla. You saw it with SB 827 that was going to upzone, the land use areas around transportation hubs. That's all of a sudden this backlash against statewide control, which is kind of funny when you think of it being as democratically, progressively controlled as California is, because they're always for kind of more control at the federal level. But then all of a sudden now at the local level, it becomes a whole new situation. But this intellectual honesty really kind of fell apart on that issue, and I think it's falling apart on all these other issues as well.
Let's just quickly say there's been a fair amount of research in Santa Clara County on this housing first idea. That Gavin was one of the first to do that. And Santa Clara County has gone all in on it and has terrific data collection on it with the help of a couple of tech firms that have set up databases. And what they have found, when they can, and it's extremely expensive now, so it's hard, when they can get someone into housing with the services they need available, not forcing them to take their medication, but make sure their medication's there, and some counseling and what they call supportive housing, 85% stay. very high. So the folks who just want to be out on their own, given a home, given a place to be, and this is not a lavish home, but sort of efficiency homes, they want to be there. So
the data says this would work. Is there? And someone asked this from the audience: is the political will there to carry through that? To do that? I mean, that was kind of the thinking behind the deinstitutionalization, right?
right.
Close down these institutions, move people into the communities, and serve them in the communities. We close down the institutions, move them into the communities.
But,
There
and
was
we
never that
we
part.
have the resources at the statewide level to be able to do this. A lot of the localities don't have the resources themselves to be able to do it. But Prop 63, which put the surtax on millionaires on their state income taxes in California, that brings in a lot of money. That money hasn't been actually going to the services that are really could make a difference if they're actually moving toward that. So part of it is a failure of the state just not getting the money to the places appropriately. Part of it is localities really trying to still wrestle some semblances of control from the state, but then also it's a tough problem, especially homelessness and mental health. It's a tough problem because it becomes a very emotional issue, not just a policy white or black issue.
Okay, well, let's move on and talk about some issues related to our president. This is the part where it can be a little hard sometimes to be nonpartisan, so bear with us if you will. But perhaps the most startling developments over the past couple of weeks have involved Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen. Remember the police raid of his home, his condo, his hotel, all that kind of stuff. And as well as the ongoing investigation by Robert Mueller. Now, recently, President Trump hired former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani to be part of his evolving legal team. It's unsure if Giuliani's actually working for him or against him. It has been, it's Carson, who represents a bigger threat to President Trump, Michael Cohen or Rudy Giuliani?
Donald Trump does at this point. I don't even know where to begin, to be honest.
Let's maybe frame it around some people have been saying Michael Cohen. This shows not just that it's obviously a juicy topic to talk about, but that this really tells us a lot of what Robert Mueller is going after, as well as those questions, remember, that Mueller wanted to ask the president that were leaked. Any sense of, is Mueller, because, some people have said, if a prosecutor has a list of questions to ask you, he already knows the answers.
Right.
Okay, do you think Trump will ever talk to Robert Mueller without a subpoena?
No, I do not think so. No. So to go back to the questions, I'm not entirely sure that those were actually the questions that Mueller would want to ask. They probably were questions that have been talked about within his team, but Mueller, and I've said this multiple times here, Mueller is a very tenacious, very professional, very smart, but also very tight-lipped individual. He is a great prosecutor when it comes to really kind of following the breadcrumbs appropriately, but also keeping people in line and making sure that the investigation is never compromised for mistakes by him or his own team. It's been very characteristic of his entire career. So I found that news story to be a little bit too whoopsies for someone like Mueller. Now, granted, it's impossible to always have complete control, as we all know, over your entire team. But
it doesn't mean
just
that
seems a little bit too
Sorry,
much.
go ahead, Barbara.
The follow-up stories seem to indicate that Mueller's team had conversations with Trump's team. It did not put anything down in writing, but talked about general areas, and these were questions that they derived from that conversation and then leaked for some reason. Who knows? But it's I can't either imagine him going under oath. I can't imagine what good it would. But then people will keep playing his statement about the mob. The only people who take the fifth are the mob.
Well, CNN had a thing today where they have a transcript and a video of him under oath in an arrangement. And he does exactly what you think he's going to do, which is deny that he ever did this. And the woman says, who's the attorney, says, actually, we have the lease right here, and you signed it. And he said, the more I think about it, I did sign that. And that's, of course, what sends a chill through the entire legal team of Trump. And I think that one of the suggestions is that they were able to provide these questions and make them public to let the president know this is the kind of thing you're going to face. And as John says, and they may very well know the answer to the question, so you'd better be right. And that's not his strong suit.
I saw on the way up here, I saw a bulletin on my phone from Politico. Didn't read the story, but it said that Donald Trump was today was very upset. He couldn't understand why, after hiring Rudy Giuliani, the investigation was still a problem.
Well, Donald Trump has he's always had, this is not just his political career, but he's always been someone that has made bombastic statements, made very definitive statements, and then when he's had to, he just kind of like, well, I just never said that. That never happened.
Right.
But in today's world, when you have recordings, you can always just point back to that. It becomes very difficult when you're sitting across the table from a bunch of lawyers and prosecutors to be able to do that. It's much easier, no offense to my media colleagues on the panel, to be able to do that in front of reporters because you can start to just brush them aside and move on down the road.
On Fox and Friends, for example.
Yeah.
Well, even they apparently kind of...
Or as reporters are yelling at you from as you're
Yeah.
walking on into your limo, into your your venue, into the Air Force One. It's easy to just be like, yeah, whatever. That's not what I said, and continue walking on. It's hard to do that.
You can do the Ronald Reagan thing and just say, can't hear you, Sam Donaldson. What? So the president and I believe the vice president spoke before the National Rifle Association in Texas. They're a big confab. Any reaction to that? Is kind of what to be... Actually, someone said he had spoken there, was it 4 times in a row or something, and that no other president had done that?
Well, if you think about it, okay, so we're heading into a midterm election. From the special elections that we've seen for congressional races, particularly, you've seen a strong swing toward the Democrats. Even though they necessarily haven't won those, you see a very strong swing enough to make the Republicans in D.C. they should be scared of what could happen in November. And so obviously your opponent's base is riled up and ready to go. How that will translate into much larger midterm elections versus a special election, which can be kind of weird sometimes. Well, we don't know yet, but every indication is that the Democrats are going to be in a strong position. So what do you need to do? You need to rally up your base. And the NRA is the best way to do that when it comes to Republicans. They have the funding, they have the very passionate membership that can really kind of be your volunteers, be your boots on the ground, and that's something that Republicans really need. So I'm not surprised that the White House is continuing to really kind of push, and especially in front of their membership and their
And now they have
funders.
Oliver North, so it's
Yes.
it's got the
Oh,
whole-
God.
I especially like this comment where he said to the NRA that your Second Amendment rights are under siege. And let me just tell you that they will never be under siege as long as I am president. So are they under siege or they're not under siege? And it seems like it's just so Trumpian to you hit those dog whistles, but you don't really have the logic to it.
I do have to note that with Oliver North becoming, of Iran-Contra infamy, becoming the president of the NRA, the Daily Edge tweeted, Russian-backed terror group selects noted international arms smuggler as its new president. I present that without any comment. Something that actually isn't a Donald Trump thing, but it comes out of Washington, and that is the story about the House chaplain. And kind of an odd story because Paul Ryan, a Roman Catholic, did push out Pat Conroy, the Reverend Pat Conroy, a Jesuit priest, and then let him back in after Pat Conroy resigned. Do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, some folks are saying, of course, we had a house priest, but
it's just one of the. I don't know. You can go.
Well,
go for those
what struck me was apparently Ryan's chief of staff, Burke, I'm not sure of the name, did make some comment to Conroy about, maybe it's time we had something other than a Catholic, maybe. And and then subsequent reporting turned up some legislators who, House members, I think there were any senators, who had been talking about that it was time they had someone who was a real Christian. And I grew up. This is nostalgia night for Barb. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a little town called Boyertown, a farm community. I grew up on a farm. And it was Pennsylvania Dutch country, all German. And the churches, there were all these big, Lutheran and United Church of Christ churches all around. And my mother was New York Irish. That's a whole nother story how that happened. But so I was raised Catholic in this tiny little Catholic church in town. And I remember when John Kennedy was running for president, and all of the Protestant ministers were preaching from the pulpit that it was important that everyone vote for Nixon because if Kennedy won, the Vatican would be. So I don't know. Part of me is a little relieved that some Christian groups that have somebody to dislike other than Muslims. I mean, they can still get up a good fight among themselves. I have no idea what Paul Ryan was thinking. He's leaving. I don't know why he did that.
So they wanted someone more Christian than one of those wishy-washy Jesuits,
Jesuits, yes. Exactly.
Because they're
someone with a family is what they said.
They're kind of the Marine Corps of priesthood.
Yes.
I mean, the Jesuits are.
Yeah.
And what he said in his prayer was so tepid. There's got to be more to it than that. But I don't know what it was. But then he snaps back with a letter, and suddenly Paul Ryan has got religion. So there you go.
Well, let's talk about the economic news that's been coming out lately. By most measures, the economy is strong. By GDP and unemployment, currently it's below 4%, I think 3.9%. And arguably, depending on your sources, full employment, so-called full employment, is anywhere between 4.6% and 5%. At the same time, wage growth, not strong. And, we're going to see interest rates continue to creep upward. But nonetheless, strong economic times usually, and since we're not an economics program here, we're going to talk about the political aspect of this. And strong economic times usually help the party in power. Will that help? I won't say will it help the Republicans have a good November, but will it buffer some of the badness that they're probably going to be facing with political headwinds in November?
Based off of historical precedents, you'd say yes. Yeah. I mean, there's no reason not to think so. I mean, granted, Trump's approval ratings aren't great, but they're not nearly as terrible as they could be. And so
better than they were.
Right. And so if you have some good economic news, that can kind of counteract, some of the other things going on, especially for those incumbents who are running. Now, the open seat situation kind of creates a wild card situation where it becomes a little bit less so as the economy, is it the party in power, who controls the White House, those situations. But at least for the incumbents, it's at least helpful for them. It's not going to be hurtful for them. Will it be enough in some of those seats to really kind of pull the incumbents or the Republican nominee across the finish line? Who knows? Really, what really kind of I think counts more so is what's happening in August, September, maybe into October. But it's definitely not bad news for them, at least.
It's one of the few times that I think Republicans would like to have the president play more golf and do less tweeting, because there is a case to be made that the stock market is going great guns, the unemployment is down. He is coming through with some of the things. You may not agree with it, but immigration, all those kinds of things were definitely popular topics. But the polls show they don't mind his policies, they dislike the person. And he is incapable of keeping people from hearing the very worst of things. I don't think it's even ideological. I think it's that there's a model in the United States of how you behave, and he's not behaving like that. And I think it's upsetting to people. I think people just look at it and say, that is not how I expect a leader or a president to behave, and he undermines his actually very good economic news.
Yeah.
with
Well,
that.
and someone in the audience asks, will his tariffs actions undercut the strong economy?
It's very, I mean, from a purely economical standpoint, yes, they should, and they probably will. The question is, will it happen before November or not?
Yeah.
And that's the million-dollar question. How much does China retaliate in advance? Now, if they're smart, they won't retaliate immediately because he's actually fairly pro-China in most respects. He's constantly praising the Chinese government in Beijing. And so if I were Beijing, I would rather have someone praising me than a Pence or someone else who might not be so friendly to me. But yeah, eventually the tariffs will harm the economy. It's just a matter of when.
Well, the Chinese said we're going to stop importing soybeans, and it's an enormous crop. It's just it repeats itself. But it's the drunken uncle at the Thanksgiving dinner who says the immigrants are taking all our jobs. The people in China are underselling us. And it sounds logical until you look into it. This Iran deal's terrible. Well, yeah, but when you look into it, it actually is much more difficult than that. And when China says we're not going to import soybeans, and the farmer, all of a sudden Trump is like, okay, well, it may hurt for a little while, but it's going to be better eventually. These are all things that sound like easy solutions, but there's a lot more to it once you get in the position.
It has been said that a president who has, you're in office for a number of years, you're almost certain to have a recession somewhere during that time. And it's been said that a president who has a recession early in their first term is lucky, right?
Yeah.
They've got still some credit to burn with voters. I'm new. I'm trying a new program. You stick with them. Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama all had that. They came in during a recession or had the recession shortly after they were in power. If you have it later in your first term, usually is your only term. Jimmy Carter, George Herbert Walker Bush learned that. So is it possible that, well, obviously anything is possible under President Trump. More than normal is defined as part of anything. But could Trump be facing, the headwinds of a recession in 20, but in particular maybe of his own making with the tariffs, with
Well, I mean, we are due for a recession. We are in the longest span of economic growth. Now, for most of it, hasn't been phenomenal economic growth, but it's been steady, consistent economic growth since 2009, June 2009, when the last Great Recession ended. So that's the single longest span in American history since World War II. So the 1800s were an odd time. So yes, just statistically speaking, we're due for a recession, and theoretically, you think probably a big one given the amount of growth we've had. But when and how that occurs, who knows? Yes, I think tariffs are bad economic policy. If you hear an economist saying otherwise, question their credentials because they've never worked. They've always led to some sort of economic calamity of some level. And so is this kind of the issue that causes everything to kind of snap back into place? Possibly, but it could be something just psychological also. It could be just someone on Wall Street thinking, you know what, maybe this isn't so good, and then all of a sudden you have this kind of like psychological rush on the run on the bank sort of situation. So it's kind of hard to tell. What's really bad though is for California if that occurs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if we see even the smallest of recessions in the state of California, say goodbye to the surpluses, say goodbye to the budget stabilization accounts and all of our rainy day funds, and say hello to draconian cuts to basically everything, because we are wholly dependent on how the stock market performs when it comes to our budget.
The thing I wonder is if the old rules apply, because it's so much different now than it was. Just to take the gig economy, just to take people who are working jobs, Lyft, Uber, those kinds of jobs, that didn't exist before. Mm-hmm. The fact that brick and mortar is going away, where are those people going to go? That robots are taking over a lot of the industrial jobs. Where are those jobs going to come back? Where are those people going to go for those jobs? And it just seems like maybe everybody thinks this, but it seems like we've gone through a real tidal change in what the economy really means, and do those old laws and premises still hold? And I don't know. That's a really good question. But yeah, it seems like tariffs are a bad idea. It seems like, this tax cut was a one-shot deal. It was a feel-good, but where does that go? I don't know.
You've seen it already. I mean, if you look at the Great Recession, if you look at California's economy pre and post Great Recession, you actually do see a reshuffling of the cards. Pre Great Recession, California was actually very economically diversified. Post Great Recession, it's Bay Area. You take the Bay Area out of the equation.
Is that tech? Is it
Tech, yeah, largely tech, and then everything feeding into tech.
And the Commonwealth Club.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Me flying up here,
That's right.
staying in my hotel room for the night. But you have LA, a completely different economy now in LA pre and post Great Recession. Beforehand, you had a rather robust manufacturing. You had the entertainment. You had a bunch of little other things. A lot of the well-paying blue collar jobs never came back to Los Angeles. They've been replaced by low-paying, low-skilled service jobs. So now you have this weird stratification of high-paying white-collar positions, tech, entertainment, just regular businesses, finance, legal, etc., academia, and then low-paying service jobs, where LA used to have a nice, robust kind of middle area, blue-collar, high-skilled kind of blue-collar work. That went away and never came back. And so as a state as a whole, now you're really dependent on something that's very, very flimsy when it comes to, will it stick around the Bay Area? It doesn't have to be in the Bay Area anymore. Tech doesn't have to be here. And if you hit a recession, they start to kind of move out. They go elsewhere. Will they come back to San Francisco? Maybe, maybe not.
It's also true that the what you're saying about LA is it's more apparent in LA, but it's happened here as well. I mean, the middle class is just vanishing here, and that's part of the housing problem. People need high six-figure salaries to be able to get into the housing market, and that wasn't the case here even 10, 15 years ago. I mean, I bought a house in 1996. I could never buy a house today on a journalist's salary. And I think just as the recovery since 2009 has been, I mean, it seems very robust now, but many people are left behind. You still have this large, group of folks who are not doing as well. And I think the next recession will be worse. And the recovery, again, we'll see more robots, more automatic driving, more things that give engineers jobs, but do not provide those middle-class jobs.
Well, on that note, let's tackle our next topic before we get to the news quiz, and that is racial profiling and private organizations. Let's just say organizations in general, because one of the examples I'm going to give is a university. But we, of course, have all seen the Starbucks story about those two black men who were waiting for a white friend, so they weren't ordering any food. And, police were called, they were arrested. They recently settled for $1 each, plus the city to make a donation for skills training for high school students. Probably one of the classiest settlements that we'll see.
Yep.
But unfortunately, I mean, just today there was a story of this woman who is, I believe, Bob Marley's granddaughter, great-granddaughter, something like this. She and two other African Americans were in California renting a place through Airbnb, and when they left, a neighbor called the police because they didn't wave at her. And so she because they were bringing their suitcases out to their car, she thought they were burglarizing the place. So police came, locked down the block, helicopter, all this kind of stuff. And then there was the story about the two Native American students who went to Colorado State University for a college campus tour, and they spent their own money to drive up there and to attend this thing. And a white woman was, by her own words, creeped out by them. She called the police because she thought they didn't belong. She later said, quote, "They just really stand out. They're just creepy kids. It actually made me feel sick," unquote. And she complained that one of them looked Mexican. So first of all, white people aren't coming off very well right now, but also just what I really wanted to bring it up here to talk about was just how the different organizations involved, Starbucks, Colorado State University, Airbnb, how they deal with these things, some of which they might be responsible for, others maybe they aren't. So I kind of open this up to any of you on the panel. Just what do you think? Or what do
I think they should hire Rudy Giuliani. He could he could handle this and nothing flat. 2 weeks. Well, no, I think
And Michael Cohen.
yeah, and Michael Cohen. Well, it's ongoing and it's a problem, and it kind of goes back to what we were just saying about the economy. That middle class that felt left out and left behind and lost their sort of middle class house and a dream and college and all those kind. Those people they resent that. They resent that idea, and it feeds into this idea that somehow there's another group of people and they're getting all the breaks and we're not getting any of the breaks, and it's so unfortunate. I mean, it just that. Think about it. I went to the University of Colorado, which is far superior to the Colorado State. By the way. They should go to the University of Colorado. But, I mean, I know that area. I grew up in that area. And it has a very conservative bent to it, and somehow that's become racist. And I don't know where we made that jump between American values, good, solid people, middle class, to this absolute virulent racism. It's just hard to feature and hard to fathom. I don't know where we lost that.
I think having a president who vocalizes it
Yes.
has not helped any.
Yes.
It normalizes it.
Normalizes.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Says
All of these stories, it's so weird. None of them make sense. Yeah, exactly. They weren't really doing anything suspicious.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've lived in New York. I've lived here in the Bay Area. I've lived in LA, and I've seen very suspicious behavior before.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's just people being people, which
Yeah.
a lot of people are just weird. Come on, and so, but I never thought, oh wow, they're definitely up to something. I'm going to call the police. Now maybe I should have in some of those cases. I don't know, but it's very weird that people would call the police on someone with suitcases.
Yeah.
Or
Or
who
someone who's
brings
just quiet.
a suitcase to rob a place?
Yes. Right.
the most organized
That's
crime
right.
ring ever.
Like, hold on, let me get my roller bag before I go. Right? Like, because if you're stealing something too, you're not taking clothes usually. I don't know. I've never robbed an apartment, so I don't know.
If you do rob something, park the car in the garage, put the stuff in
There
the car,
you
and then you pull
That's
out.
right.
No one sees you. I'm just giving you this advice.
Yeah.
I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying. This person was, yeah.
That's right.
Here's the moral of the
Could've
story.
saved
Make
you
sure
5
you
to 10,
wave
right?
and smile
That's
whenever
right.
you're doing something
Should've waved.
Yeah.
you shouldn't be doing.
But you know what? Something that does kind of run through some of these. The two Native American kids, they were quiet. They didn't chat. They wouldn't answer some questions. Well, okay. Anyone who's shy can certainly identify with that or knows people who are shy. The woman who didn't wave back, it's kind of like you have to, live up to my standards right now and my exact expectation of what you are, or, it's SWAT time. Well, I should note, the university has paid the two students for the money they spent and invited them back for a VIP tour of the school. Starbucks is closing all of its stores, I think 8,000 stores, in order to do, not forever, for one day,
For one day.
to do some training, stock up the day before. But, they both of them, I would give them some credit for at least
Yeah.
trying to deal directly with
Making the effort,
what
yeah.
was.
And
the problem.
Airbnb has been grappling with this situation too, because there have been a lot of reports about just the way that the platform's designed. It can lead to either apparent or just innate kind of discrimination. And they're to their credit, they're also trying to think about how do they do this. It's difficult in their situation to understand, but I think all of the organizations involved, were receptive and smart about how they went about the response.
Okay. Maybe we can burn through a few more questions from the audience before we get to the news quiz. I'll just say we have our requisite question about what will it take to impeach Trump, and will it be worse if we get rid of him? Yes. I'm not dissing the question, but we get that question every time. So it's like it's not a week to week until I get that question once or twice on a question card. let's see. Well, we did talk about that. And how important is the seniority of Dianne Feinstein when we're talking about, new blood or different candidates? She's very powerful in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
She is, and I think that is really important. I mean, I think that's the best reason to vote for her at this unusual time. When, I mean, she is somebody she's a power. She's maybe a little too eager to work across the line with those nice things she said about Trump, but she got that back under control. She's an unusual and powerful person, and I think taking a risk on somebody new at this time, if she's up for going back, I'm going to vote for her.
Coupling on that, I mean, you just also with experience, you get knowledge.
Yes.
She knows the issues in and out, regardless of what the issue is, and it's really hard for someone new going in to immediately be able to get all those issues really under the bat. Kevin De Leon, maybe he'll talk in great generalities, but he's never dealt with federal policy really at all. He's been a state and local person from the very beginning, so you can understand it at the kind of broad level. But when you're really trying to dive deep into the minute details, it's beneficial for a state like California, to have someone as well versed in the issues like Feinstein.
Maybe quick responses. What do you see as the avenue to the Supreme Court with the Iowa 6-week heartbeat law? This was a law that bans abortions after the heartbeat can be detected. Do you think that'll go to the Supreme Court?
Well, that's they're looking for one to take to the Supreme Court, and the anti-abortion people are convinced that they're making inroads, and it seemed like it seemed settled. I mean, it just seemed like that was a fact of life, and yet you hear them say over and over, "This battle is not over. We're making inroads. We're going to make this to this to this," and they're trying to do it incrementally, and that's an example of it. I cannot believe that women, in particular in America, are going to stand for that, but. They are not giving up.
We're going to have more news quiz questions and obviously a lot more to talk about in 2 weeks. Monday, May 21st, right here for our next week-to-week program. And, of course, you can find other questions on the website. Thanks to our great panel today, Chuck Nevius, Barbara Marshman, and Carson Bruno. Thanks to all of you here today and everyone listening and watching online. Have a great rest of your week.